Wilco! Wilco!
Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for an album review. Wilco, The Whole Love. I'm finally reviewing this. All I needed was just, a little personal time to go back and revisit some older albums in Wilco land. And I would try to give you some background on these guys, but I'm just going to let Caltrachesta do that before we start off this review.
Thank you, Anthony. The Wilcos is a group of rock musicians, and they release albums on a regular basis, and their first album came first, before all the other albums that they have released. Now, their newest album is newer. It came after all of their older albums, which were released before this album.
Believe it or not, that might have been his most accurate band introduction to date. Alright, so, new Wilco album. Wilco, sadly, is another one of those groups whose new material is constantly getting shot down by haters and by fans because their older stuff is praised so highly. Wilco's new stuff gets labeled as dad rock. They get called out constantly for not being as experimental as they used to be. And even though I think this new LP goes against some of those stereotypes, this album will probably not shake anybody who's been saying that stuff. Even though this album is much louder and much bolder than Sky Blue Sky most of the time, even though this album, to me, is as experimental as A Ghost Is Born in some points, even though this album is way noisier and messier and more experimental than the self-titled LP, even though this LP finishes off with a heavily arranged 12-minute piece of alternative country, and even though the opening track has these rising strings and this heavy beat and all these electronic textures that kind of remind me of Radiohead's last album, all that stuff will probably not shake naysayers, because people love being right. And if anybody decides to just like opt out of listening to this, that's fine. Let them. Because I thought this was a fun listen. Wilco has really gotten their act together again and assembled a series of really catchy, fun, straightforward pop rock tunes that I think longtime fans, if they're open to it, and newcomers can enjoy. The LP starts with a kind of impressive opener, like I mentioned earlier, that Radiohead kind of similarity there. Between the strings and the beats and the electronics, it's a really impressive piece of studio work. And I know Wilco isn't exactly known for this sound, but they sound so comfortable doing it. The only spot I wasn't in love with on that track was toward the end, where they really sounded like they were playing their asses off, but the mix is kind of thin and not all that great. It didn't feel loud, it didn't feel aggressive, it just felt like the guitars could have just been pumped up a little bit to add some then maybe it would have blown me away, It wasn't a fantastic ending, but I thought it was still a pretty decent track and pretty ambitious. But after that song, it's just clear sailing for country ballads, power pop tunes, and psychedelic poppery. Just really good songs with great personality, melodies that just stick in my head. As a band, I just think Wilco showcases a lot of charisma on this record, which is why I'm kind of able to see past the fact that most of these songs really wear their influences on their sleeves. On the song I Might, there's this organ that sounds totally like it should have been on that classic garage rock tune, 96 Tears. The song Sunloathe has this really Beatles-esque psychedelic pop atmosphere with these rising vocals in the background that kind of remind me of the song Because from Abbey Road. And the song Capital City too reminds me a little bit of the Beatles, like when they would play these tunes that featured a lot of like pre-war jazz chords, like When I'm 64, or Honey Pie. And the song Dawned on Me, I think, has the most borrowed melody out of any song on this album. The melody sounds like Madonna's Like a Virgin. It sounds like Supergrass's All Right. Duty Head, we listen for you. Thank you. The songs Open Mind and Born Alone have melodies that sound really familiar to me, and Standing O has an introduction that you've probably heard in a million rock songs. Still, Wilco's really great production and sincerity and just ability to rock some of these ideas out, make hearing them all over again kind of worth it. It makes these ideas kind of feel like shiny and new again, like a virgin. Now, my favorite moments on this LP are the upbeat tracks, and thankfully there's a lot of those to be had on this. I mean, Wilco has really kind of turned up the energy on some of these songs. I know these guys are no punk band, but they have not kicked this much ass in their songs since like the 90s. I Might just has these really wailing guitars and pounding drums, and Jeff Tweedy sounds like so energized with his vocals. And when the hook comes on, it's just this swell of glockenspiel and acoustic guitar and organ and drums, and it just sounds really, really friggin' messy, but it's also fun too. They're going more for this energy thing as opposed to this, you know, refined kind of thing. To me, all the upbeat songs kind of share that characteristic. Dawned on Me, Standing O. It's energetic, but innocent. It's like drawing all over the walls with crayons and shit. Now, the slower tracks and the softer tracks on here, they're decent. I'll listen to them, but they don't get me going as much as the faster moments. And it's not necessarily because they're softer. It's just that songs, sort of like Black Moon, for example, are wrapped up in the same kind of, you know, generic instrumental arrangements that made Sky Blue Sky so kind of underwhelming. I guess the softer tracks on here copy just as many ideas as the more upbeat tracks, but for some reason they just don't sound as interesting to me. Wilco's softer and darker and sadder side is usually what gets people talking and what gets people freaking out, but those songs on this record just don't have as much impact for me. Songs like the title track on this LP are the ones that just have this really feel-good, fuzzy mood to them, and I think they come off the most successful. And I think that's a great thing, especially for Wilco, a band that's usually known for the opposite. Plus, I think a lot of groups kind of go for that aesthetic. They try to make something upbeat, they try to make something sweet and fun, but it ends up just sounding too sugary. And Wilco does, you know, have some sweetness to them on this LP, but they kind of even that edge out, so there's no sugar rush by making things a little noisy, a little experimental, a little sweaty. I didn't hate anything on this LP, but there were a good handful of tracks on here that just kind of breeze by me and don't hold my attention, especially the last song, which I don't think justifies its 12-minute length with enough changes, in my opinion. But still, I thought this was a pretty good record. I enjoyed it, and who knows, maybe it'll grow on me a little bit. I think I'm open to that, because there are enough great songs on here that I may want to return to this in the future. What do you guys think of this LP? I know some of you Wilco fans are pretty opinionated. Do you like this? Do you hate it? Do you find yourself constantly comparing it to every other album they've ever put out? Let me know. I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this thing. Anthony Fantano, Wilco, The Whole Love, Forever.